So moving on with the panel discussion, now this promises to be a very, very enlightening one. The topic is franchise building in kids content, and we are in conversation with Vineet Kanabar, host Storytellers and Story Sellers podcast, joined by Jaskirat, Kabir, Singh Gill, COO USP Studios, Mitali Desai, co-founder and COO Black White Orange Brands Private Limited, Jiggy George, founder and CEO Dream Theatre, Murtuza Kutianawalla, country head distribution and syndication India Toonz Media Group, Puneet Sira, film director, co-founder of the Foundry. Can I have the speakers on stage, please? Over to you, Vineet, sir.
I think we're missing a Jiggy. Amazing, that's a full panel. Yes. Thank you so much to IWM for having us out and about. I think all of us are re-experiencing meeting people and being at a panel for the first time in 3 years. So a round of applause for IWM, and a round of applause for us for being here. My name is Vineet, as the slide says, and we're here to talk about franchise building in kids content, right? I have a few questions which I'm sure the esteemed panel here is super equipped to answer. But let me set some quick context before we get into this, right? Kids content has always been a driver of consumption. It has been a driver of volume, whether it is on TV, whether it is on YouTube, whether it's on other platforms as well. The folks that we have here all run content production companies or content licensing companies, and we're looking forward to some invaluable insights about what are the ingredients, what are the challenges, what is the future of building IPs for kids, right? Let me open this up by asking Puneet this question. And Puneet is intimately involved in developing a lot of IPs, whether for kids, whether for other audiences. Puneet, what are the ingredients of a great kids content IP? And I'd love to hear examples from across the board or learnings from across the board. But in your experience, what are the ingredients that go into making a great kids content IP?
The ingredients of making great kids content, I mean, I guess that's the million-dollar question. The first thing you got to really understand is you look at the kid and try and figure out what is it that makes that kid tick. Now, you can't generalize children into one category by saying, okay, here's 6 to 8 or here's 8 to 13, because children are different beings. They have different personalities. Some are more athletic, some are more academic, some people, some things make them laugh, some things make them cry. So everyone is an individual. So you can't really say, okay, I'm going to make kids content and all the children are going to love it. And in today's time, their viewing habits, the fact that there's such big influences in people's lives, in the home, when it comes to going out to a restaurant to eat with your family or what to watch on TV, they have a really big part to say in it, which wasn't the case when we were growing up. Parents told us where to go, where not to go, what to eat, what not to eat. And today, when we sit around the dining table, it's, the kids are saying that this is what we'd like to eat for dinner. And we compromise as parents. So when you talk about making great content for children and you're targeting children, you have to make sure that they can see themselves in that show. They can mirror themselves. So now that's the biggest challenge that we're talking about here, because the challenge is the mirror, because everyone is so different. So how do you make a superhero? I'm not a superhero, my children aren't superheroes. How do you make that relatable to a child? So what you do is you create that universe, you create that world where these characters will do what your kids will do. They will go to school, they have homework, they have chores, they get told off by their parents, they have dilemmas about falling in love with a boy or a girl. And so therefore, their everyday life becomes relatable. So this can be done for creatures, this can be done for, like I said, superheroes, it can be done for animals, it can be done for as long as it's relatable to every child, and what's the common denominator in that child's life. And I think if you take those things, then those kids see themselves in those, and these characters then become inspirational. And you decide that, you know, when I grow up, I want to be something like that. And I think that is the core ingredient to answer your question. I think beyond that, then obviously it's the imagination of the creators. But as long as you keep to these grassroots, I think you're in a very safe territory.
Love it. I think it's a great insight to kick us off. I'd love to bring Mitali in and get your points in on what are other ingredients, right? To me, relatability, I think, given the way that content is distributed now, it's not, like Puneet said, it's no more just the TV at home. Everyone's got their own content to watch, so relatability ranks very highly. But what are some other aspects that you've seen rank high?
Of course, a lot of things that Puneet said. I think the most important thing would obviously be great storytelling, because that is pretty much the crux of good content as such. Over and above that, I think it's just about judging or understanding the pulse of kids of different age groups. Because what's very important to understand is this audience that we are looking at, this audience that we're catering to. It's an evolving audience, right? So it's not like you will just have one particular age group or one particular segment. It's varied, right? So we probably have to look at a lot of social developmental needs of the child, and accordingly we need to customize a lot of this content. One very important thing, and because I come from the brand licensing industry, I really strongly feel that one very important ingredient would be creating an entire ecosystem around any content that you're making. So it's not only about making a show. I mean, unless that's what you really want to do, of course. The idea is to make that show keeping in mind that there could be multi-levels to that. There could be multi-touch points to that. So right from consumer products, promotional licensing, any kind of mall activations that you might want to do, because of which you might need to create any kind of character costumes. So all these are, things that you need to kind of put into this entire ecosystem, plan it out well at the inception stage. It cannot be a by the way, and where you suddenly say, oh, I might as well make merchandise because, the show is doing so well. That's not how it works, right? Because by the time you actually launch the product, you would have probably missed the buzz. So, very, very important to kind of plan right from the beginning, and that's what, we try and get broadcasters, brand owners to, somewhere understand and absorb this, so that it becomes much easier for us to then execute any kind of a L&M program around any kind of content. So yes, the ecosystem is absolutely key as per me.
Absolutely love it. I think the two things that I took out of what Mitali just told us is there has to be a learning and developmental needs aspect to the kind of content that you're making, and extendability of the IP into other media. On that, I want to bring Kabir in, and I want to ask you about the kind of content that you're putting out on YouTube, right? It's a big driver for kids' content. It drives discoverability, there's consumption hours, there's views itself, all of this, right? But there's also the very easy cost of switching, right? Kids are coming in, they watch animated content 1 minute, they're watching someone else stream Minecraft for hours on the other side, right? On one hand, it's taken you months and millions to create this content. On the other hand, it's a guy at home with a webcam, right? How do you navigate this challenge? How do you start building for what Puneet and Mitali told us? How do you start building for?
Wow.
I'm sorry, there are no easy questions on this panel. It's kids content, but none of this is child's play, right?
This is, you nailed it like and how. So starting from there and, you know, just merging the two questions that you asked, let's just bring it from there. You know, when you say, what is it that appeals? So I cater to the preschool segment. In digital, kids are defined till 13. I do from 0 to 5, right? For me, it's edutainment content where it is, there's some value going back to the child where, you know, when he's on the screen. We fundamentally believe there's a difference between the customer and the consumer. You know, the customer happens to be the parent in my segment, but the consumer is the child. Yeah. Now, in that segment also, the switching, at least on my platform, YouTube, there are dozens of, you know, suggestions being given there is very, very easy and quick and fast. But how we do that is with making it engageable. You know, there is something in it, you know, to add on to everybody what they said earlier. There is something in it that grips the child's attention. Like they say, you know, the attention span is of that of a goldfish. But to hold that a minute, minute 2, minute 5, etc., etc., etc. So my segment is not so much impacted by Minecraft and Roblox or etc. It's still preschool, but even within that segment, there is just so much and so many different kinds of stuff available. So it's about giving value back to the child, giving them something, you know, engaging that keeps them hooked to our content for longer.
Love it. I think it was a couple of years ago now that we had this whole stream of procedurally generated animation that had come in on YouTube as well. I'm guessing that's more of a rival to the kind of stuff that you're doing versus maybe...
So like you rightly nailed it, right? We take months and, you know, years, weeks, days, months and years to produce something in animation, whereas that's a machine popping it out and, you know, the algorithm treats it differently. But then that's where, you know, man versus machine. There is an element of fine-tuning that brings value back to the child. And the customer, like in this case, the consumer and the customer sees that through. The brand over years that has been built up has its weight behind the quality of the content and the assurance to the customer's mind that, yes, this is a safe place, this is a safe brand for my child to be with. That plays a very big part.
Wonderful. I think that's a very important buy-in to get as well. I want to pivot over to Jiggy, and I think it's very interesting that Kabir raised the point of interactivity. I know you've been building some content with an AR lens in it. I think there's been some work that you've done with brands as well in that space. How should people retool their IP thinking for an interactive world, right? And what are some of your learnings that you've got?
I don't know about interactivity, and I'll just go to the first question. We don't have all the answers, because if we had all the tick boxes of what would really work, everything would have been a hit. And there are people in this room who are sitting on the, doing what they do every day, and I don't want to piss them off by saying how they should be doing a better job. So I think this is the most hopeful time in our lives, man. About 15 years back, when we were sitting at Cartoon Network, a person who was creating any form of animation had to knock down the door and make his presence felt to get someone's attention. Getting someone's attention, which was one of us pompous guys sitting on that chair, would have taken you ages, right? Today, if you are a four-member team as a coder sitting in Chennai, putting up a piece of content like Choo Choo TV did, and hitting 33 million subs, which is almost 1/4 of the TV universe. in this country, I'm saying more power to these guys, more hope to all of these guys who are just putting up content and getting real data from actual consumers. Because we used to have 10 commandments before: what works, what doesn't work, human beings don't work, animals work, preschoolers don't work. It's all, I mean, the consumer's not validating, right? So I would think the first thing is consumer validating. The second thing, I tend to not plug the clients that I work for, but I am in awe of the Japanese, right? So consistency. Everything for them is never done from a one-year window. So if you look at something like Pokemon, all companies, all of us as entrepreneurs also want to mitigate risk. So I won't create one IP, I'll create 7. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking 6 will fail. Pokemon does one brand, and that's all they do. And if you work with them, you will tire because they expect so much out of you. But I'm saying that consistency of purpose, storytelling, 360, what Mitali spoke about, where there is more than just one screen. And the fourth one is genuinely just doing that one thing that you do really well. So I think these are the answers I think as tick marks to success. And otherwise, just put Augie, yeah. It'll just be number 1, I think.
I'd love to bring you in on the interactivity bit for sure. I think all that you've said, obviously, with a lot of thought and experience behind it. But let me needle you a little bit more and ask you, going forward, right? While the Japanese and Pokemon are obviously fantastic example, we've seen some great work happen at home as well with IPs that have been built for kids, right? But fundamentally, do you think the kid consumer is changing because of the media environment around us? And does that have an impact on how you're planning franchise? Let me ask you this in an example way, right? So, Mitali, you mentioned maybe earlier your default was video. If I want to start a franchise, it might be video. Do you think we will see a world in the next few years where a game is where that begins, or a filter is where that begins? Maybe could be a toy is where that begins.
But this is not now really, Vineet. This has always happened. So when franchises are built, they can come from anywhere. So we are in awe of Marvel and DC, which comes out of a comic. But a He-Man and Barbie came out of a toy. So if that toy was, created some kind of a buzz in that generation, could it be worked backwards into storytelling? In the case of games, Angry Birds or
Absolutely.
Sonic and the Hedgehog or any of that, that's all come out of games. So I think that it's just a matter of time before something else can pop. There are people here, some of us who've been going through, with Angry Birds, we had to break down the door in convincing people that something coming out of a game can be a hit, because most people at that point of time could not believe that it could happen. So to answer your question, yeah, of course. Of course. It's just a matter of time, yeah.
Love it.
Sorry, and to the host of...
I'm going to bring Murtuza in to offer experiences from both sides of the camera. And I think along with me, you're probably the youngest person here as well. So,
What nonsense.
Oh, I'm so sorry. My bad. I would rewind and delete. But to ask you the same question that's gone around, right? From a creator's point of view, from a presenter's point of view, what are spaces that you've seen have worked for you, right? What would your preparation be like when you wanted to create something that was engaging for kids? And what is it now that you're in a licensing consulting sort of space?
So before I answer that question, firstly, thanks for having me here and share this panel with some really experienced gentlemen and women. So I'm really happy to kind of just hear them all day if I have to. Coming back to your question, I think there's a lot of factors. There's absolutely no secret sauce. As we already know that you can build like 7 IPs like Jiggy mentioned, but you probably may hit one, and sometimes not even that, right? So I think it really boils down to working with some really good teammates, good talents, managing to get some really experienced people, not just on the creation front, but also who can envision your IP to kind of go the extra mile. It could start from YouTube, it could start from a game, or even a toy for that matter. But if you don't have a great product, or you have a great product and good distribution, and either or not supporting it, you absolutely are floating in a loner's boat. So I think it's about really putting together the right creators, the right writers, the best animation team that you can possibly think of, and then working with the right distribution team to kind of strategize where you want to go with it.
Love it. I want to circle back and ask something that I partially attempted earlier, and maybe we'll start with Jiggy this time. We've seen all the examples that you mentioned of great IPs that have been created, whether it's coming from a game, whether it's coming from toys. They're all sort of global examples, while there's a groundswell of indigenous Indian IP as well. What are some of the challenges or considerations that you're keeping in mind when you're developing stuff in that space? Maybe you can go around after Jiggy.
See, Indian IPs are the way to go. The only challenge really is the fact that the universe that they're working with. So let's for a moment say that in a country where we are having as many children as we have, there is no preschool really on any of the big networks on prime time. The reason for that is not anybody's fault. It's the same reason that people have a challenge with Arnab and the gang screaming on news channels, right? It's because it's advertiser funded. So if it's advertiser funded, it's about share of voice. Who can speak loudest, who can speak whatever. So the pitch of all the animation that's on air, and I'm not commenting in terms of it being bad or good. I'm saying that preschool, for example, will not exist because our rating system does not capture it. So as a result of which, all these guys like Kabir have to be on YouTube or then on one of the specialty channels if they have any of it. But I'm saying that local is the way to go. I mean, by transliterating something and still Johnny Bravo is blonde, right? So it's much better if it's from a cultural milieu. But having said that, if there is no voice at all, there have been great instances of stuff that works where there's minimal amount of dialoguing, and especially if they're animals, so they don't fall in any cultural space. So I think it works. So what are the tick marks that we think of? I think that if I have to go down to what is the key part of, it does not matter whether it's preschool or any form of kids content, I'd obsess on pre-production. Just obsess on pre-production. I believe that everything that Mitali was talking about when it comes to consumer products, licensing, it's still a small business which will explode in the future, I'm sure. But everything is an afterthought when it comes to Indian IPs. So something becomes popular and then you say stick it on a t-shirt. But if you see the smallest of IPs that we would work with in the Western milieu, they obsess at a pre-production stage of how it would look on a mug, how it would look on a product, how it would land up being a toy. So I think that obsession is okay, even if it doesn't happen in the short run. But when it becomes really big, to put somebody who is, you know, it just doesn't work, yeah. So I think that I would just say pre-production would be a very key part in how you would work with IPs.
Got it. I mean, I think I relate with that as well, even though I don't make kids content, but I relate with that as well, right? I think there's a lot more in terms of planning, in terms of vision, that we need to scale IPs beyond just the content product of it or the engagement product of it.
And Vineet, if you see the smallest of properties, when I say smallest, there's no small and big. It's only about what becomes a hit, right? But when we look at some of those that didn't become a hit, there's so much work on pre-production that has already been done by most of the Western studios, which we don't see so much in India, which could be the...
Right. Let me bring Mitali into this and maybe ask you about what are the challenges when you're setting out an Indian IP maybe for a client or you're developing it with an external partner. What are the challenges in pre-production in India, right? Is it just a cultural thing that we just haven't got to doing it well? For example, merchandising is something that just somehow doesn't seem to work in India, right? It's, even at an IPL level, it is very hard to make money or break even on merchandising. Is it just a cultural thing, or do you think there's more to it?
So definitely more to it. You know, like Jiggy said, yes, local content is definitely the way to go. In terms of challenges, I think, you know, and I'm saying this because, we at Black, White, Orange, we've been, working on some content, and, we've been trying to, in fact, put quite a bit together. Hopefully, we'll see soon, something soon. But one of the biggest challenges that we are facing is that, there is very little appetite. And no offense, I mean, obviously everybody wants to do what works. I mean, if it's a formula that is a win, then, why not go and run after the same formula? But at the same time, there is very little risk appetite when it comes to, tweaking what we can possibly offer. I mean, and, you never know because kids might want to look at something different. There are a couple of shows which actually work really well when it comes to local animation. We have examples, we have big examples like a Chhota Bheem or a, Motu Patlu, which kids love, right? But what, might be missing is, and I don't know if anybody's, I'm sure people have thought about it and people have worked towards it, but what if we try and look at animation which is probably slightly more elevated? Now, if you come up with a suggestion like that, there might be resistance initially, right? Because it's not something that is tried and tested in India. It's something which works really well in the West. But there is resistance. One reason could be that when you're looking at elevated animation, you're looking at huge budgets, obviously, and budgets are a constraint. There's no denying that. But, when there's too much Me Too happening, then it kind of gets stuck somewhere in a rut, and that maybe is one big challenge. Another big challenge on local content actually, and again we've faced this often, is that there is very little investment that is made on creative development in terms of creating style guides, creating assets. Now, what one has to realize is also that, these are the crux of a good, strong L&M program. So if you do not invest in creating these, technically you have no good assets to kind of create a merchandise range from. Then what you're doing is you're just kind of slapping on screenshots or slapping on some very basic poses or artwork. And at the end of the day, kids want to own a piece of merchandise which is really cool, which is nice, which is fancy, which is wearable, and not just, a screenshot that they've seen on television. So I think that is another big challenge. And frankly, we are trying to, change that in some way where, because we run a creative vertical as well at Black, White, Orange, we're trying to kind of create style guides, show broadcasters like a bigger vision in terms of what we can do, how this can become serious money. As Jiggy said, we are in nascent stages and there is a long way to go. Completely agree. But I think that little bit of start somewhere needs to be made, and probably that can definitely be made once you have a good asset base, once you have, some good merchandise that you kind of create and things like that. And that's where we'll be creating, bigger things, like you've seen what Marvel has done, you've seen what a DC has done, you've seen what Angry Birds has done, you've seen what Minions has done. These guys are investing loads and loads of money on creative assets. I mean, they literally churn out 80 to 100 style guides, over a period of what, 3 years, 2 years. So that's the kind of vision I think is, probably lacking, and that's where we'll really, really grow exponentially if we kind of look into that.
I'd love to bring Murtuza in. I mean, I think there's a lot of stuff that I recognize from my experience as well when trying to scale IPs. But I'd love to get Murtuza in on this as well.
Yeah, so, I think Mitali mentioned a very valid point. When we're creating an IP, it's the amount of efforts that we really put into it, the extent that we draw from it. I mean, we're reaching merchandising, and like even Jiggy mentioned that, put it out there, it may not happen, right? What happens is a lot of people are scared and not willing to take the risk because they might approach a platform or a broadcaster, and that might, all your ideas might turn around 360 degrees anyway. And you're still willing to settle for whatever you may get out of it. So I think that kind of risk and confidence, and of course persistence needs to be there in your own IP to be able to go the extra mile and spend 30 lakhs instead of 5 lakhs. But, back it up, do the right things, make sure you have no loose ends, and then go there and see what happens. I think that kind of confidence with your IP has to be there. Otherwise, it wasn't going anywhere anyway.
Got it. I think both very, very valid. I want to bring Puneet in because sort of naturally leads into what you're doing as well, right? I'm going to put you a hypothetical. Say your top kids IP comes in and someone's come in to bid for your top kids IP, you're deep in discussion. How important is it for them, or for you, that they are looking at it in a holistic way to help take that IP to its fullest potential? Is that a conversation that you are also having from the creator's side with producers, with people who are coming in to create those IPs?
Basically, what we do within our company, which is the Foundry, is we actually create the IPs in-house. So it's not like we're looking at IPs from outsiders that are coming into pitch. But yes, to answer your question, when we do create an IP, we're not just creating a show. We are creating a world. And when you create that world, that's where you can start building franchises. If you don't create that world that these characters live in, you're limiting yourself to how far you can take that concept. Franchisability and merchandising obviously goes very much hand in hand, and I think Mitali said it right. But I'm going to go back to something that was talked about earlier because it also applies here, is that what are we creating here in India today? And that is, it has to be Indian-specific content. We come from such a diverse culture. We have so much history, heritage, that we're not really playing into. And if the world can open its arms out to manga, to anime, which is totally alien to our culture, to the Western culture, and yet it's so well embraced, it has to be a two-way street, because kids around the world are watching anime, they are watching manga. Kids in every country of the world are watching Marvel, they're watching DC, they're watching all of these characters even though they can't relate to them. They can relate to them because the storytelling is simple. What I'm saying is you can't relate to the world. So it's a two-way street. If we can relate to what they're offering us, there is no reason whatsoever why the world can't relate to what we have to offer. But it's a question of belief. It's a question of courage to go out and make, content and have total belief that it's not just for us. We do make it for us, but in the background, you know that if our kids love it, other kids will love it too. And this doesn't just apply to children's programming. This should apply to everything, for adults programming, for films, for TV. And that's, I think, in the second stage becomes the merchandising. Absolutely love it. I think draws my attention to the fact that even a global player like Disney will go out and put a Moana or a Raya out there, right? And there is this entire need, and I'm saying this as a 35-year-old, but there is this entire need to see yourself as kids on screen, right? And my memories of the IPs that I've consumed are Johnny Bravo or the Cartoon Network staples, the Hanna-Barbera staples that you've seen, or Tom and Jerry. And when you really think about it, Tom and Jerry's been around since the 1950s, we're talking, right? That's a long time. We're closing in on 100 years. I think it's high time that we have Indian content, Indian representation, and like Puneet said, not just created for our audience here, but created at an export quality stage, right? Because more and more in a connected world, we're seeing issues that are similar, we're seeing values that are becoming more and more similar, and it's just a great opportunity, right? I'm going to put a last question to Kabir, and then I'm going to come around to all of you and ask you for one really exciting IP that you are working on right now. If you can talk about it, it would be wonderful. Or you can just say, hey, we've got something, it's brewing, can't tell you, that's also fine. We talked about, very briefly, just off stage, we talked about, no, not that one, the other one, the other one. Very briefly, we talked about the kind of money that's coming in. I see the relief. Very briefly, we talked about the kind of money that's coming into kids' content, right? We saw what's happening with Coco Lemon. There's lots of analogs with other formats as well, right? I'm seeing that kind of money come into podcasting as well. But all of this money is outside of India, right? In a nutshell, and I know it's not a nutshell question, but in a nutshell, can you tell us what you think it would take
for us to see those volumes of deals or those kind of numbers?
Wow. I think it's like we spoke about earlier. Our content going across, localized into their languages, them adopting and liking it as much as we like their content. So that will be a good starting. Beyond that, it's all about making it a more organized market where, like for example, organized retail for merchandising, better practices, faster, quicker, simpler, deals happening, legalization and things like that. But primarily, fundamentally, I think it's about adaptability of our content abroad. How open are they? I mean, when I speak to my colleagues in India, there's a lot of content production being done here. A lot of those people as service studios are doing content production for international studios in India. But then that comes around to how deep are your pockets, because that level of quality, when you do it on an Indian platform, like we're saying, how many takers are there for it, right? I do that for myself on YouTube, a little bit of the high quality stuff, but then it's the question of those CPMs. They aren't there yet, right? But then that's okay. We got to grow the market. We got to put it there. The customer will come, right? And the belief such like that. You need to have the conviction in your product and say, let's go put it there, and eventually it will grow. It will become something. So I myself, I can't say that I'm doing dozens of those IPs, but I am definitely going down that path. They're saying, okay, not today. Maybe 6 months, maybe 1 year, maybe 3 years, but it will happen. It's beginning to happen. So money is coming in. It's when do they start looking here?
Love it. Before I come to you for the final recommendation, there's just one question that popped into my head when Kabir was talking is, how do you measure the success of an IP? It's such a grandstanding question to end this thing, right? Is it number of clients who are interested in buying it? Is there a bidding war for this IP? Is it how maybe an e-commerce portal would measure it, saying average revenue per consumer or lifetime value of a consumer? How do you measure the success of an IP?
I think it's exactly what you answered in terms of the life cycle, right? How much, the longevity of how long that you could continue to make something work over a period of time. That would be a best way of looking at it. And I just want to pick on those, why can't our, I think what Puneet spoke about is that there is, as we speak, quite a few great pieces of work which is being done by Indians sitting here in collaboration with either to get the Western sensibility. So I'm not even going the route of where Kabir and all are. These are the brave frontiers of setting up stuff here, and someone in the US is like ballet-ballaying it, right? But that is too cool. But I'm talking about a lot of the stuff being commissioned by Netflix, etc., where you have things working out between people with our sensibilities here and collaborating with people in the West to make it happen. So I think it's a matter of time that we'll see more of that. Why does it eventually comes down? It's very unfair to our artists to say that we don't make it work when the math doesn't make it work, right? The math has to work, yeah. Like if everybody wants one point of part of content, even on the VOD platforms, most of the VOD platforms, kids as a genre is an afterthought. It's not a focus at all. And most of them are still doing what the linear guys are doing of aggregating content from the West, or taking the same Indian content that's working on linear and putting it on the VOD platform. So,
but natural, you take Dora the Explorer from TV, you put it online, it has to be interactive, right? Like immediately has to be reimagined for the medium. That's kind of what we're all seeking. Wonderful discussion. I'd love to get any last thoughts in, or I have a difficult question coming your way. No, I don't. I'm joking. I don't. I'm joking. My last question to all of you is something to leave the audience behind with as well. An IP that maybe you're working on or you've seen come out in the market that has you excited, that's taking the market in the right direction. We'll start with Puneet.
Well, like I said earlier on, we at the Foundry, we are a IP development content studio. So we do feature films, we do series, we do animation, kids content, and podcasts. So when it comes to kids, obviously there's a lot of things that we can talk about with regards to our IP. But at this stage, yes, there's a lot of material that we have that we're really excited about. I won't go into one specific one because it is IP. And so what I would do is, I would welcome people to come and talk to us about the material that we have. It's exciting stuff. It's stuff that people haven't seen before. And it's great for this market.
Love it. And for those who weren't part of our conversations off stage, Puneet has some 300 IPs developed. They've really used COVID time really well, so please head up the Foundry. Mitali, to you.
So yes, we are working on some Indian IPs. Unfortunately, there's not much I can give in terms of details right now because of some NDAs that we've signed. But if you're asking us for best in-case examples, since again we're a brand licensing company, we represent quite a few IPs, right from some of the top Hollywood studios, so Universal Studios, Hasbro, Paramount, and so on and so forth. I just want to kind of, since we're talking about IPs and cool IPs, just want to kind of, talk about this one IP that we're working on, which is, of course, representation property. It's not something we own, obviously, and that's Jurassic World. And you also asked us, what is the success measure? So I think one major success measure would be if you're seeing, the same IP kind of coming up in new forms, again and again and again, whether it's through movies, whether it's through content. So now if you look at Jurassic World, I mean, the franchise started as Jurassic Park, right? In fact, in 2023, we complete 30 years of Jurassic Park. That's how old some of us are right now. So, we have now moved on to Jurassic World. We are going to see the, trilogy, last of the trilogy, Dominion, which is releasing in June. They also have content which is now on Netflix, which is like a series format. So I think somewhere that kind of establishes how big or how huge or how popular an IP really is, because obviously they're coming up with new stuff because, people are watching it, they're able to monetize it through other streams, whether it's consumer products, whether it's collaborations. And, you'll see a lot of Jurassic World happening in India as well, whether it's on the promotional licensing front or consumer products, etc., around the movie window. So, just definitely one of those super successful, not conventional, because it's not your typical animation space, but definitely one of those IPs to look out for. So I would put that in one of the success brackets.
Wonderful example and totally on point when you talk about lifetime value of an IP and how that becomes a big success measure. Absolutely. I'm going linear. Murtuza, you're next.
So I wouldn't say an IP per se. I think there are a lot of IPs I'm excited about, but the spaces that I'm excited about is what I'm going to talk about. And personally, what interests me is the whole NFT, play-to-earn, metaverse space, which honestly is a very interesting space because you're directly dealing with the consumers. You can interact with the community, which respects and understands your IP a lot more, and I think that's one space. The other space is the adult animation comedy space. I think as an Indian market, we've not really explored that space. I think that's another one that I'm really excited about, and as a company, Toonz, we're going to be indulging in both of these spaces very soon.
Love it.
Not me. I mean, I was told right from the beginning, whatever you say will be on social media. So, no, I don't want to talk about any of the IPs. I'm very excited for, the journey of what Rajiv Chilaka and the guys at Green Gold have done of taking something which has lasted for so long and then reimagining this to what they've done with Netflix. So, big shout out to these guys because this is quite amazing.
Love it. I think Jiggy can neither confirm nor deny any of the IPs that he's got. Kabir, you're.
So I will not, don't have a specific IP to say, but I rather have a platform to say,
Sure.
The digital world. We all spoke about going to TV production houses, linear, etc., etc., etc. come adopt my universe, see experience, YouTube, everybody. It's tough. I'm not saying it's easy, but give it a go. You know, put your creativity out there, let the customer see it, let the customer know what you are about, and their love, if you hit the nail, their love will help you grow and put it all out there. You don't need linear, you don't need to, like Murtuza said, you know, you build something and suddenly somebody says, oh no, this I don't like, change the green to red. Why? You know, so that's where these platforms give you the independence and the freedom to say, this is what I conceptualize and this is what I'm putting out.
Love it. I think we're a little bit over time, but completely worth it. Thank you so much for joining us on this panel and sharing your points of view. Thank you, IWM, for having us.